And hello, Hearts of Oak. Thank you so much for joining us once again. And I'm delighted to have someone who our UK viewers will know very well. Maybe the War and Pussy may not know as well, but you will over the next 45 minutes. And that is Dan Wootton. Dan, thanks very much for your time today.
So good to be here, Peter.
Great to have you. And obviously, people can follow you at Dan Wootton is your handle on X on Twitter. And your Outspoken show airs every weekday, Monday to Friday, 5 p.m. UK time, which is noon for you guys on the East Coast, or for those earlier risers want to watch it maybe in your first hour in work on Pacific Standard Time, it's 9 a.m. So catch Dan Monday to Friday on that. Now, Dan, there is a lot to discuss about, but I'd love to maybe just start on your background. Your background was kind of in media, but showbiz. It's quite a movement from showbiz, which probably a lot of us now would think is not that important, to now you discussing real issues that affect real people. Tell us about that move from the showbiz background in media all the way now to current affairs.
Yeah, well, it's interesting actually, because in the UK newspaper scene, there is this weird transition actually, where people go from being in tabloids, writing about the entertainment industry, and editing this column called the Bizarre column at The Sun, to then moving into news. Piers Morgan is the most famous example of that. So I guess in some ways that wasn't unusual, but I think for me it was about why it happened and when it happened. And it happened between 2016 and 2019, when I could see the entire British establishment and the mainstream media, which, remember, I was a part of, trying to overturn the Brexit referendum. So I was associate editor at The Sun, and The Sun had campaigned very hard for Brexit. And it was over that period that I got my first news show on Talk Radio, which is now Talk. And over that time, I really did become, I guess you could say, radicalized. Because I was so horrified and mortified to see the entire mechanism of state work with the media to try and overturn the biggest democratic vote in British history, which was the vote to leave the European Union. And then, just to give you the very potted history, of course, we finally get to the point where we're out in January 2020. I decide I'm going all in on this, and I take over the drive time show on Talk Radio in the UK from Eamon Holmes. So I was on air every afternoon, Monday to Thursday, 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. UK time. And I started the show in February 2020. And we all know what then happened within days. So by that point, I was just utterly furious over the whole course of COVID and that scandal and sham. And that then led me to leaving the mainstream media, I guess, to join GB News, which I thought was going to be a true alternative.
Right, that is a whole other story, and you ended up again with Eamon Holmes there. But I mean, you studied, what was it, politics and media? So that was an interest anyway. It wasn't doing an arty course at uni, but you kind of were focused on that. Again, you did it in New Zealand. Do you see yourself, because I sometimes think we have too many US guests on. I thought, oh, Dan, great UK. I was kind of a bit Kiwi as well. How do you see your identity in terms of that?
It's really interesting, actually, because lots of people who are, by the way, always on the left and always everything that they claim that we are. So I get lots of people on the left saying to me, go back home to New Zealand. Stop talking about British issues. What do you think you know, you New Zealander? Well, I actually get pretty offended by that, and I'm not going to lie, because I'm a British citizen, but I'm a dual citizen, because you're allowed to be that. For Americans, that's obviously quite a weird thing, isn't it? Because you have to have citizenship of one country. But as a New Zealander, I am absolutely able to be a British citizen, but I've been a British citizen since birth, because My father was born on a British Army base in Malta. My grandfather fought in World War II. In fact, three of my four grandparents fought in World War II for the Allied forces. And my mum was actually born in Essex, and they were part of this wave of emigration to New Zealand. It was described as the 10-pound poms, people who were leaving sort of war-torn Britain, the life of rationing, to go and set up a new home in New Zealand. But as a result, I had so many British influences growing up, as you can imagine. You know, I ate the Sunday roast and we had our Yorkshire puddings and I watched Coronation Street every night. So it was always my goal to move to the UK. Professionally and personally, I guess, I always had such an affinity with this place. And I moved here when I was 21 years old. I'm 42 now.
Just past 40, yeah.
Yeah. God, that's so disturbing. You get to a point where you actually don't know. I don't know if I'm 41 or 42. I think I'm 42. And and I've spent my whole adult life here. I've chosen to live here. But in saying that, I have a huge affinity to New Zealand. I love it. But again, I find it so fascinating that if you're on the left, that's absolutely accepted. Yeah. You know, that your heritage can absolutely be part of your identity, but you are accepted in this new place. Whereas with me, it's like, go back to New Zealand. But no, I view myself as a British New Zealander. That's a very long answer to your question.
You're half and half exactly, yeah, in terms of time wise. So from here on in, it's more Brit than New Zealand time wise. Tell GB News. You were there at the beginning, weren't you? You were one of the first hires. What was that period like? Because a lot of excitement on GB News. It's billed as kind of the Fox for the UK. I guess you could look at it that way. Something fresh and exciting to push back on the legacy media, that's very much to the left. How did that all come about? On you being on GB News right at the beginning?
Yeah, I was so excited. I was the first presenter to be named. Andrew Neil, who was the very short-serving chairman, had been announced, and then I was the first announcement. So I was all in on this right from the start. I knew that the UK needed a media revolution, and I thought GB News was the vehicle for that to happen. And I actually hosted the first regular show on the station as well, which turned out to be a complete disaster because people who had followed GB News from the start, there were loads of technical issues and the channel wasn't really ready to air. But while lots of other people moved on, I so believed in the mission, because it's very odd for American audiences to even wrap their head around this. But we had no sort of conservative television whatsoever. Or even, by the way, TV news that you could describe as being from the center or the center right. Everything was liberal. Everything was from the left. And actually, a lot of it was from the hard left, actually. The Guardian, parts of the BBC, Channel 4 News, Woke ITV, Sly News, as I call it. So I was really a believer, a passionate believer in the need for there to be a broadcast revolution in the UK. I thought the vehicle was going to be GB News. The unfortunate thing is, again, this is so odd for Americans to even wrap their head around, but we have a government censor. Officially, they're called Ofcom. I call them the Off-Communists. To begin with, they left GB News alone, really, because we were viewed as a bit of a joke. But what we did was build up an incredibly loyal audience. And all of a sudden, certainly my show, Nigel Farage's show, a couple of other on the channel were number one. We were beating the BBC. We were beating Sly News in the ratings. We were doing huge numbers on YouTube. And at that point, there became a mission to silence us, to shut us down. And it's very sad because I say us, I say we, you know, it was like a little family for me. And then in ludicrous circumstances, I was cancelled because Lawrence Fox, who's the former actor turned politician, has he been on with you, Peter?
Yes, we had him on a couple of weeks ago. So
Yeah.
yes.
So you guys know Lawrence. And
Yes.
look, he's a firebrand. He's an absolute firebrand. But he came on the show. He was very, very angry about the fact that a woman called Ava Santina, who is an awful, hard left, hypocritical woman who is a regular on the Piers Morgan show, Piers Morgan Uncensored from the Left, that she had been so dismissive about the need for there to be a minister for men because male suicide in the UK is just out of control. It's one of those national scandals that the MSM just doesn't want to talk about because it doesn't fit their narrative at all, does it? Who gives a damn about white working class men? White working class men in Britain actually are underrepresented in virtually all statistics. So Lawrence was very furious about this, said in quite a tirade during my show that he didn't want to shag this woman. All of a sudden, you would have thought that I had just gone out on the street and shot an elderly woman. I mean, I was enemy number one. I hadn't even made the comment, but I didn't apologize for it. That seemed to be what my crime was. And all hell ensued. And actually, GB News unfortunately gave in to the mob. They gave in to the left-wing mob. They gave in to the off-communists. This was ridiculous, Peter. I mean, my show was after 9 o'clock at night. So in the UK, there's this thing called the watershed, where basically if you air on TV after 9 o'clock, you can do whatever you want. There are honestly, on Channel 4, they have people that they would describe as trans women, but they have men with their penises out playing the piano naked on television. And that is considered completely acceptable. But Lawrence Fox saying he wouldn't want to shag a woman for political reasons, that was the line that had apparently been crossed. But unfortunately, what happened is GB News gave in to the mob. Their content has massively changed as a result. But for me, I just view it as this incredible sort of opportunity that I wasn't expecting, because all of a sudden the US election has proven the MSM, something that I've known for a long time, and in fairness have been arguing for years and years and years, just switch it off, turn it off, the MSM is finished. But I mean, the MSM has never been more finished. It's over. It's dead. And here in the UK, we're probably usually about 5 years behind America. I don't know if you agree, Peter, when it comes to sort of trends, media trends, political trends. And the great thing is I'm now at the start here of what is a true independent media revolution. I'm not the only one. There are other people who are doing it brilliantly, but I'm very excited to be a part of it, because what it means is I'm not censored. I don't have the off-communists able to take me off air, or there's this ridiculous thing that America got rid of in the 80s, which is sort of like a concept of equal time. You know, if you have someone on saying, you know, a man is a man and a woman is a woman, you have to drag on some absolutely hysterical human being from the far left who tells you that you're wrong. So everything becomes a sort of confected performative debate just to please the government censors, and I don't have to do that on Outspoken at all.
Yeah, I agree. And I saw you, I think I don't think Lawrence actually knows what the watershed is, but that's a whole other thing. Look at his Twitter.
He doesn't. Oh, he doesn't.
But you seem to be the wrong party in that, because Lawrence had said something and he said, look, if I've said something, then I should be punished. And then Calvin got sucked into it just simply for backing you.
Yeah, Father Calvin Robinson, who's now a regular part of my show, Outspoken. To be honest, though, this was the direction of travel. And that's why I think this is actually a brilliant opportunity for all of us. I was very inspired by, over that period, the people in America who had gone through something very similar, I guess. So Megyn Kelly, who was a regular on my show, she came on every week and we became friends over that period of time. She could not have been more supportive. I mean, number one, she quit GB News overnight. She was gone. She had actually been sitting watching the whole Lawrence Fox incident because she was my next guest on that show.
Oh.
And she just couldn't believe it. She just could not believe that this would become a national story and that we would lose our careers from it. So she quit overnight. But not only that, she provided me a huge amount of inspiration in terms of how she came out of her situation with NBC, all of the confidence issues that you go through. Is anyone going to want to watch me? Does anyone care? Should I just retire and just go away gracefully? She really got me through all of that. So I've based a lot of my show on what she did in America, actually, with hers. But there were other people who were incredibly supportive as well, like Dan Bongino and Dave Rubin, who've obviously both been a big part of the Rumble revolution. And so it was a really difficult time because, look, let's just be frank about it. I had not intended to leave GB News when I did. However, I absolutely could see the direction of travel. And there's just a complete revolution going on. You don't want to hear from someone who you think could be having their strings pulled. And unfortunately, the thing is, I know about the mainstream media, Peter, because I've worked in the mainstream media. And the whole reason I've been cancelled from the mainstream media is because I wasn't prepared to play by the rules and I wasn't prepared to do whatever my billionaire bosses told me to do. But trust me, there are limitations if you're part of the mainstream media. There are things that you just can't talk about because Rupert Murdoch doesn't want you to, or one of the billionaire owners of GB News doesn't want you to. And for example, there are some shocking stories in the UK at the moment that I have covered massively on my show since we launched in July. So we launched on July 5th, the day after the UK election. And obviously this has turned out to be a seismic election because the UK's effectively been taken over by socialists, which I knew was going to happen. I always knew that this was going to be a really shocking turn to the hard left, and free speech and a whole load of civil rights were going to be under threat in the UK. I'd been talking about it on GB News for 4 years beforehand. So to be able to come back the day after the election was incredible. But I'm talking about lots of issues that GB News simply ignores now. They have banned their presenters, for example, from talking about the cover-up in regards to the Southport massacre or the truth about Keir Starmer's family, which he's kept hidden from the public. So there's a whole load of issues now where I'm like, oh my goodness, there's no way I could be on GB News being told not to talk about this. No way. Or being forced to describe patriots as far-right thugs, or pretend that you can't even utter the words Tommy Robinson or Katie Hopkins. So I got out at the right time. And I think the bigger point is now, and you can see this from the US, trust an individual, because an individual is far less likely to have been corrupted than a media organization.
No, 100%. And I want to pick on one or two of those topics that you dropped in. But let me ask you last thing on the media side, because you kind of came across as someone like Calvin. You could say things, but you could say them in a way that you rile people with your words, but not with how you put across. Lawrence and maybe even Mark Stein or rougher, and they will push more. But you seem to have the gift that the Calvin said, to say it with a smile, and that pisses off the left even more.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and that's the thing. Look, it's ridiculous the way that Father Calvin and I were painted in the media. I mean, honestly, it does. Our viewers know that the way that we were portrayed was completely ridiculous. And actually, even Mark and Lawrence, sure, they might say it with a bit more force, but fundamentally, they have been proven to be right on so many issues, from grooming gangs to mass immigration to everything connected to COVID and the vaccines. So in some ways, I'm sad about the fact that it was all shut down at GB News, where we were there doing it as a little family, but probably it was inevitable.
Yeah. Tell me the two pressures are advertising and Ofcom, certainly in the legacy media, and you went up against Ofcom, and of course the advertisers would make decisions. I mean, does that mean in the UK you can't have a legacy media or mainstream media that actually tells the truth? Because there always be those
100%.
pressures.
100%. No. I mean, there's not even any question about this. You cannot tell the truth on the mainstream legacy media in the UK, and you are censored. That is just a fact. Everything that happened with Mark Stein, myself, Lawrence Fox, Father Calvin proves that. But I can just say that from having worked in it. Now, yes, I push the boundaries more than virtually anyone. And I would do it with a smile, absolutely. And I'd always want to do it as respectfully and carefully as I could. But as I say, GB News, which is meant to be the Fox News of the UK, has not spoken at all about the cover-up connected to the Southport massacre. That's all you need to know. That is all you need to know.
Tell me, we've just had on some of the issues, you mentioned Southport, touch on that. We've had a petition going around, which as we record, I think is about 1.9 million.
By the time this is on, we're going to be well over 2 million.
But that's in 24 hours. And I watched Jess Phillips, sadly, I know, forgive me, but you have to watch it. I know. She was on LBC and she was asked about, what do you think about this petition having 1.5 million signatures? She goes, well, you'd have to ask those who signed it. That level of arrogance and just refusing to understand.
Totally dismissive.
Tell us about this petition and what that means. Because when I initially saw it, I was like, oh, it's not going to do anything. Actually, it is a vehicle for people to express their frustration.
Yeah, I was the same as you, to be honest. So I was watching this initially and I thought, oh, another petition. Why not? But actually, it's not going to make any difference. However, this is not a petition. This is a people's revolt. And they are very different things. I mean, when you're talking about getting 2 million signatures in less than 3 days in a country of 67 million people, I mean, this is phenomenal. And the issue is that we have a government that is effectively illegitimate because they lied about virtually every major policy issue, point blank lied. And actually, they didn't just lie. They lied and then they spat in our faces with the glee in which they immediately instituted their lies, treating us all as fools. And then the second thing is the UK has this, I now believe, ridiculous and antiquated electoral system, first past the post, which means a government that actually didn't get that many votes, was voted for by less than 1 in 5 of the population, can have such a massive majority in the House of Commons at Westminster that they are able to effectively tear the heart out of this country over the next 5 years. So this petition will clearly not lead to a general election. It's not about that. It's about saying, the British people, we have had enough. We are sick of this. We are sick of the Uni Party. We are sick of the establishment. And we're turning to heroes, free speech heroes like Elon Musk, who is pointing things out going on in the UK in a way that unfortunately very few people are. And he predicted just a couple of days ago that the establishment parties in the UK, so that's Labour and the Conservatives, who, let's be honest, have had a stranglehold on power in the UK since before the World Wars, he predicted that they will be crushed at the next election. Now, the Westminster elite, what they do is they laugh and they mock, because that's what they do. Even when you're talking about the richest, most successful man in the world, right? They laugh and they mock. What does he know? What does he know about our electoral system? Our electoral system is designed to stop a revolution, is designed to stop a democratic process actually saying we've had enough of politicians who lie to us. But I disagree with them. I predicted before the last election that Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, will be Prime Minister in 2029. Now, Nigel was a colleague of mine at GB News. I would count him as a friend. I also would say I don't think Nigel is perfect. There's lots of issues that I disagree with him on. But the point is, he's the only politician in this country who is promising true reform, smashing up this absolute shower that we've had to put up with now for decades, where we're promised that immigration, for example, will come down to the tens, or net immigration will come down to the tens of thousands a year. And it's 1 million. It's at 1 million. And that's just the people we know about. There is a actual invasion of our southern border via the English Channel happening on a daily basis, and they will not even stop that. So I agree with Elon Musk on this. This petition is not going to lead to a general election, but what it is going to show to the world is that you cannot lie to us anymore. You cannot treat us as fools. And we are, as Donald Trump famously said, going to fight, fight, fight. And if it's 5 years, we'll fight for 5 years. Now, for me, as you know, Peter, I believe that we need to find ways to fight within the system and do it in a way that isn't violent. But I have had people on my show, from David Starkey to Father Calvin and many others, Douglas Murray, who predict civil war coming to the UK.
I think that's where we're going. And I think the frustration, people can sign a petition and they feel trapped because politically, at the moment, there is no solution. We're stuck with this awful government. And it's this weird position. You mentioned Elon Musk, where Elon Musk is actually the opposition to the government. That's a strange position we'll be in, and it's an exciting position where someone of that size and importance is focused on the dangers that we face in the UK in terms of free speech.
Well, I just think, thank God Elon Musk bought X, because that is what has shifted the Overton window. That's what allows us to feel a little bit more free. I don't know if you agree, Peter, but a little bit more free on some of the mainstream big tech platforms like YouTube, where I broadcast, for example, which was awful during COVID, booting people off willy-nilly for stating facts. I think Dan Bongino was booted off YouTube for revealing that masks were a complete sham. I mean, imagine that now. So I think Elon Musk has changed that discussion, has hopefully shifted the Overton window. He is allowing us to present the truth about what's going on in the UK. And what he's doing is he is exposing the corrupt and crooked mainstream media. Now, this is something that I've been doing, obviously, within the UK for the last 6 years. But to have someone like Elon Musk doing it on his platform, it's just a game changer. It's just a complete game changer. So over the weekend, for example, Elon Musk asked, why has Tommy Robinson been jailed for 18 months? Why? Now, that is a question that no one in the mainstream media in the UK has the balls to ask, because Tommy Robinson is discussed and treated as if he's Hitler. But actually, even worse than Hitler, because Hitler you're allowed to discuss. You're allowed to talk about his manifesto. With Tommy Robinson, you're not even allowed to discuss it if you're part of the mainstream media. He is non-personed. And that's what has happened to Katie Hopkins. That's what then happened to Mark Steyn. That happened to me. That happened to Lawrence Fox. That happened to Father Calvin. You are thrust out of the mainstream media. Now, in the past, being thrust out of the mainstream media used to mean, to an extent, you were finished, right? Katie is a force again, because who cares whether you're on the mainstream media? I'd never accept an invite from the mainstream media now. Absolutely not. What's the point? I don't need to go on the BBC to be berated for me to spread what I'm trying to say. And I think so much of that change is down to Elon and what he's done with X.
No, I agree, and anywhere I've known Tommy for a decade and a half. I'm probably known Katie for a decade, but you go with him anywhere, and everyone wants a selfie. There's no anger, and we are given a narrative that these people are hated figures. You spend 10 minutes with them walking down any high street, and they're bombarded for pictures, and it points out that actually we are fed lies. We see the danger is that normies, or however we call some people, see the world through the prism of the mainstream media, and they're seeing things completely wrong. And I think your show, Outspoken, and many others, gives an opportunity to show actually this is the real side. This is what is really happening.
Yeah, and just include them as part of the conversation. I mean, they to try and pretend that Katie Hopkins and Tommy Robinson do not have a role in the UK political ecosystem is lunacy. They do. And even if you disagree with them, you can't just wish them away anymore. And that's what used to happen. And I mean, the lawfare, for example, that Katie had to deal with, the complete, I mean, they depersoned her. It was more than just debanking. You know, Katie is very bold about the fact now that she owns nothing, so nothing can be taken away from her. And they tried that with me a lot over the past year as well. They've tried it with Lawrence. But the difference is, and this is the change now, it doesn't matter because who cares anymore? I mean, and remember, I worked for these newspapers. I devoted my life to them. But I don't give a damn if someone is in The Sun or the Daily Mail anymore or appears on GB News. That's irrelevant. I don't need those platforms to be able to choose who I can hear from, because I'm going to choose myself whether I want to watch Katie's video on X or Tommy's interview on, you know, Rebel News or wherever or Maya Tusi or whichever platform he happens to be speaking on. So basically, the game is up for the mainstream media, and that will help lead to that change. But it's not over. I mean, this is still an ongoing fight in the UK. We are nowhere near as developed in the US when it comes to this independent media ecosystem, which drives the agenda. I mean, it was just fascinating and really inspiring, actually, looking at the Republican conference and seeing who's alongside Trump, and it's Dan Bongino and Tucker Carlson, and who's broadcasting there, Megyn Kelly and Russell Brand, and they're the people who important Republicans want to speak to. We're not at that point yet. Politicians here still think that to spread your message, you've got to go on LBC or the BBC. But I have a really strong belief that that is going to change over the next 5 years.
Oh, I agree 100%, and we are following the US and taking their lead and learning from them. And I will be much better for that. Some of the issues, and you touched on the immigration issue. I think the Tories basically went to the same economic school as Rachel Reeves in terms of working out the numbers coming in. And then you've got the hate speech, criminalization of memes. And this is one thing that Elon Musk has got involved at, the utter shock of people posting things online. And yet sex offenders seem to get off with community service. Do you want to just touch on that to give our US viewers a kind of highlighter window to understand what we face in the UK?
Well, I mean, again, US viewers will not understand this because with the First Amendment, none of this would be allowed to go on. It is utterly appalling and disturbing what is happening here. So Alison Pearson, who's a good friend of mine, she was on my show last week. She is, I believe, Britain's best mainstream newspaper columnist. She writes for the Daily Telegraph, but she's one of the few people in the legacy media who challenges the agenda time and again. And as a result, she finds herself pilloried by the establishment. But a couple of weeks ago on Remembrance Sunday, and I remember she texted me on the day saying, I can't believe what has just happened. 2 police officers turned up at her house because of a post on X from a year ago where she had described some Jew haters as Jew haters. I mean, these were people who were members of Imran Khan's political party in Pakistan who have a long history of anti-Semitism. And Alison had slightly confused which political grouping they were a part of. She thought to begin with they were part of the pro-Hamas demonstrations, which were going on a lot at the time. So she deleted the tweet. But that was on a factual basis. She had made a very small error. She hadn't said anything in any way that could be considered incitement to racial hatred. Yet that's what the police, 3 police forces in the UK, spent a year investigating. Now, they have, after an international outcry, including lots of coverage from Elon Musk on X, dropped that. But it took a long time for this to become public. And remember, this is going on every single day in the UK. 60 people every single day in the UK are hounded because of something that they have said online, which is legal. Now, then you look at the rest of the justice system, Peter, and absolutely your point stands. And there are some horrifying examples of it, which again, the mainstream media wants to overlook. So a Muslim man called Muhammad Hassan, I would describe him as an extremist, was at a petrol station in Bradford, and he was caught doing this on CCTV. So there was no question about whether he was guilty or not. He spotted 3 fellow Asian women at the petrol station who were in Western dress, who had assimilated into English society. He physically destroyed them. He beat them up on this petrol station forecourt. One of the Asian women, he put her head into the car and he smashed it for 45 seconds. This was all captured on CCTV. He is a woman beater. He beat up 3 women. Muhammad Hassan did not spend 1 day in prison. He was let off. Then you have Hugh Edwards, the face of the BBC, the guy who announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, guilty of making child sex abuse images and being in possession of hundreds of these things. He did not spend a day in prison. So you have pedophiles and women beaters being released. Well, not just being released, actually, never spending a day behind bars. Then to make room for people in prison who literally posted on Facebook and X after what happened in Southport, where 3 young, beautiful girls were butchered to death at a Taylor Swift dance class, a crime which horrified the whole country and which we still don't know the truth about for a whole load of reasons. People who posted something maybe a bit unartful, maybe a bit inelegant, in some cases probably they even went too far, but who made a post on X or Facebook over that time are in jail, Peter, in some cases for well over 2 years. So take the case of Julie Sweeney. She's a grandmother and a carer for her husband. She has lived a completely faultless, quiet life in the north of England. After seeing what happened on the Southport massacre, she made 1 post to a Facebook group of 5,000 people. She soon regretted it. She realized she had overstepped the mark, but she certainly didn't, in my opinion, incite any specific violence against anyone. She has been locked up for over 2 years for a Facebook post. Lucy Connolly, a housewife who is married to a Conservative Party local councillor, also in jail for over 2 years for a post on X after the Southport massacre. Meanwhile, and this is actually true, and Elon Musk sometimes points out these stories and people say, this can't be true. It is true. People have been released on the street who are hardened criminals, in some cases murderers, to make room for these criminals in prison. And it's all part of, I believe, a campaign by this Labour government against the white working classes of the UK. They want to terrify the white working classes into silence.
And that's why I'm struggling to understand how you change this from within, because that makes people extremely angry. And we saw the Southport, the demonstrations, riots, whatever you call them, people expressing anger and feeling trapped in a system. The police don't seem to be there to help you. And I grew up, I'm sure you did, Dan, trusting the police, trusting the courts. That was part of the system that kept us safe. Now, in many ways, they seem to be the enemy in how you see them prosecuting, how you see people who are being arrested.
Yeah.
And then you look politically and you have silence from a Conservative government, and you've got 5 Reform MPs. So where we are at the moment, so it's understandable that we don't have a First and Second Amendments. We don't have freedom of speech or the right to bear arms. Therefore, what do we do? We can't even meme. So you understand where that frustration comes and boils over, people thinking, actually, I don't know if the system will work, but you still want to hold within that, and you still believe that actually it is possible to get to where we want to get using the system.
Well, I think it's the only choice that we have, but I do think there will be a shifting of the Overton window over the next 5 years, and Nigel Farage and Reform UK are going to have to fill that space, because if they don't, someone else will. Yeah. So I would like, and I do support Reform UK, not as a member or anything like that. I'm completely independent. I'm not a member of any political party, but in terms of my personal vote, I switched my allegiance from the Conservative Party to Reform UK at the last election. So I've given them my vote, and I want them to be the force to do it. But if they can't provide that, then another force will come along. And right now, I would say they're dipping their toe in the water. They're doing some brilliant things, but they're not going far enough. So, for example, Nigel Farage has said, we'll get rid of all of these hate crime laws that saw Alison Pearson targeted by police. Great, you're dipping your toe in the water, but that's not enough. That's not enough. There has to be a First Amendment free speech, our equivalent. It obviously wouldn't be called the First Amendment because we don't have a constitution in the first place, but there has to be the equivalent of that. It's not enough just to say, oh, you're going to get rid of these hate crime laws. No. You have to enshrine free speech in British law. So there's a whole load of areas where I think Reform UK are dipping their toe in the water. But remember, we're entering a changed world now. And I do think Donald Trump will send out a lot of inspiration about what is politically acceptable. And we've seen that change from Nigel Farage even in the past few weeks. He received quite a lot of criticism a couple of months ago for ruling out the concept of mass deportations altogether. And I can already sense that after Trump's election now, he's changing his rhetoric on that issue. So, I mean, we knew that Trump's victory was essential for saving the Western world. And I guess, look, there's not much hope at the moment in the UK. So there are a couple of people that we can put a lot of hope in. One is Trump and his administration, because it's going to have to change some of the dark forces and the globalist forces that are doing some terrible things to the UK. And then, of course, the other is Musk. So, we've got to find hope from somewhere at the moment, because otherwise this is going to be a very bleak 5 years. Do I think it can change within the system? Yes, I do, actually. But it's going to need a true people's revolt. And that's going to be one of the messages on my show today. Look, 2 million of us have signed this petition. Imagine if 2 million of us joined a political force. We'd be the biggest political force in British history. So there's hope, I think.
And just to finish off on that point as well, I think that hope comes from, and I would certainly feel very much like Calvin, well, let's just burn this thing down. Let's call for revolution. But that doesn't always end very well. And you're left with...
Well, no, how's it going to work? That's the problem. How is that going to work? I think we have to try and make this work through democratic processes, but that doesn't mean working through the system, if that makes sense. The system has to be smashed.
No, I agree. And looking at what's happened in the US with Trump, the most important election, I think, in most of our lifetimes, because of what we faced, and not only for a country, but for the world. And then looking at what's happening, I mean, you've got the Freedom Party just came top in the local election last night in Austria. Of course, they're not allowed to form a government, even though they're the winning party. You've got the election coming up in Germany. Then you've got Orban and Maloney, and you've got
Le Pen in France.
I know. So
who they're trying to, again, ban from running through lawfare, which won't work, but
it won't work, but as they're trying to do in Germany on the AfD. But I think those two pressures because I haven't been very hopeful for a while. But actually, I think those two pressures could lead to something in the UK. The UK will have to up its act, and pressure like that from both sides, I think, will produce good leadership that we can move forward. And to me, actually, the electoral success of Trump and the electoral success of populist parties across Europe, I think, shows that there is hope for the UK.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, look, there are certain things in terms of our setup that does make it very difficult, but these are extraordinary times. No one believed that Donald Trump would get through the Republican primary process. No one believes that a Le Pen will ever be able to be president of France. Well, let's see, because I think as things look at the moment, she probably will be. So to smash the two-party system in the UK would be a massive ask. But these do feel like historic times.
Oh, I agree. Dan, I appreciate your time. People can obviously follow Outspoken every Monday to Friday at 5 p.m. UK time or midday Eastern. Look at his Twitter account, or X, shows how old I am, to find it there. Or even go directly to his website, danwootonoutspoken.com, danwootonoutspoken.com. Sign up to that and find out everything that happens. And it's Dan Wootton Outspoken, or Dan Wootton, I guess, is the handle for your YouTube channel also.
Yeah, Dan Wootton Outspoken, and Outspoken's also on Substack now, because I have been looking for a free speech platform, and I think Substack is the best of those outside of X. Obviously, I'm on X and very, very strong on X, but I post a lot of my long form things, and we do an uncancelled after show every day, and that's all available on Substack as well.
Well, Dan, thanks for your time. I know having a show every single day takes
what it's like.
I know what it's like. So I appreciate you giving us your time today.
It's so good to be here, Peter. Thank you.